Sit down, please.
Thank you.
I always hate being on the same stage with someone who is more handsome, smarter, and more well-spoken than I am. But I'm stuck with this today, so let's soldier on. It's a good topic to soldier on about. We're going to talk about the future of sport in Africa and what it means for economic development in Africa and good, solid local investment in Africa as well. We have a question for all of you, a polling question that I want to start out with so you have some time to think about it. You'll see this up here on the screen up behind me, but the fastest growing sport in Africa will be what by 2040? Basketball, football, rugby, or mixed martial arts wrestling. And if you just scan the QR code, you can register your thoughts on that. We'll come back to it later because I've learned a lot today about this particular topic, largely from sitting this morning and talking with Herbert, who is the president of World Rugby's Africa Association, Rugby Africa. And welcome to the stage today, Herbert. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Tim.
So sport is obviously a big business elsewhere in the world. Can it really be a big sport in Africa? Can it be a big business in Africa? Can sport be a big business in Africa?
I think so. I mean, it's very much my mantra. I took office 2.5 months ago, and off the back of the fact that I believe that sport is big business. We need to model ourselves, present ourselves to the global world. After all, the best athletes in the world invariably come from Africa. You will find them in different nationalities these days, whether playing for the national teams in Europe or you see them in NBA finals. The potential in Africa is absolutely massive, so I do believe so.
But they're often extracted from Africa, aren't they? The athletes. In some ways, it's akin to oil or other commodities. This is a precious natural resource, and it's being deployed elsewhere. Isn't one of the challenges here for the continent, and a continent that's very diverse, many different countries inside of it, is how do you retain that particular resource so its benefits, both financially and culturally, can grow at home?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the opportunities, I was speaking recently to Minister of Sport in a Southern African country, and she was espousing exactly the same, that economically, at a certain point, with that kind of talent, you'll have sportsmen having to move to other continents, to other countries, in order to see their real worth. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have here is to encourage investment back on our continent, where you will have many, if we talk in rugby terms, there's the extraordinary player called the Beast, who's from Zimbabwe and played in the World Cup and is larger than life, and had to leave Zimbabwe to go through to South Africa to show his greatness. And we have many up in North Africa who go across to France to play, and West Africa, where I come from, I played rugby in England for Saracens. So people go out of their home territories out. And I think the key is to bring the investment back into Africa, and for the rest of the world to understand that you can actually grow here, develop here, and the market is global rather than linked into Europe or America.
So let's talk about some of the hurdles around bringing investment back to Africa. We have the historical legacy. It's a mix of both expropriation, racism, a lack of interest, elitism, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a historical legacy to overcome, the roots of which are still present. And then there's just the current realities. Investors have other options. Investors may feel that they have other both regions and sports that are more profitable investments. So from where you sit, what has to happen structurally and culturally for this to take off here?
I think look, Tim, you're absolutely right. Every knife is double-edged. And we look at the first part of what you said is absolutely true, that there is a historical relationship that Africa has with the global world, where it's easier to take product rather than to invest. to create situations and models where it's not necessarily in the interests of Africa, and we have to change that. I think what I'm trying to do in my part of my period is asking for a major mindset change, a shift. So when I speak to my colleagues at World Rugby, I'm saying, you need to change the way that you look at us. I once came from the world of football, and we were all involved in petitioning FIFA and global bodies to give Africa more chance, rather than say, you're not good enough. When you get good enough, we'll give you the chance. Invest in us today. And we saw what happened in Qatar with this great country of Morocco and Cameroon and Ghana and the likes. But Morocco certainly sent the world on fire for people to understand that there are only players who have their qualities are born out of where they come from as opposed to elsewhere. If you had that investment, and you can look at, if it is football, you look at Hakimi and you look at the goalkeeper and the rest. We have the same in rugby. Mario Itoje today is playing for England, and he's recognized as one of the best in that field. We need a mindset change.
Why don't the Mario Itojes of the world, or the Beast? Someday I hope someone calls me the Beast. Why don't both of them stay in Africa? What's preventing young athletes from finding a home in the sport, whether it's rugby, whether it's football, and of course, many African athletes go overseas for basketball and other U.S.-centric sports.
I think at the end of the day, it's all about money. The money that's invested is taken along. Unfortunately, like everything, the money that's invested, players and families and people have a choice as to how they see the next 10, 20, 30 years of their life, especially sports that you have a shorter lifespan. We need to get the global bodies, if it's my sport, rugby, if it's others, and they're all on their own missions, to invest more. But we, as well, within Africa, need to re-examine ourselves, our policies on sports and education. Look, I had the honor of meeting an extraordinary gentleman yesterday here, and that was the Minister of Youth and Sports here in Morocco. And listening to his rollout plan, which involves education and sports, was something to behold.
And you've told me that, there are more than 50 countries in Africa, and you have a very different experience every time you visit each one of them in terms of the kind of reception you get, the kind of collaboration you get. What makes Morocco or any other country that you see as a successful collaborator successful?
Well, I think the present future is really a marriage between governments, where there is a responsibility. If you take the values that rugby has, it has, I would say, better values than many other sports in terms of bringing up young people and letting them understand the values of respect, of teamwork, of collaboration, of patience, of other things like that. So the marriage with government first and foremost, and we need African governments to also invest in the game. So we have some, my own country, I have an extraordinary president, and we're building a first purpose-built rugby stadium. It might seem a big deal, but it is.
Rwanda, notably, has done the same.
He is really championing the development of sport. We've had...
Those are governments that are populated by people with real expertise and a focus on a partnership that achieves mutual goals, right? Both for the sport and for the locality.
Absolutely, you're right. I think there's also a realization that, look, if you've got young people involved in sports, they're not going to get up to mischief. I think it doesn't matter how hard things are economically.
Rugby makes you a better parent.
Rugby makes you, at least it does, I think. Very much so.
Yeah. From the outside, we've talked about this idea of money returning to the base. And that's true of any business in any locality. To what extent is wealth and value extracted? To what extent does it remain behind and create a full-blooded, robust local ecosystem? Can sport ever be a full-blown economic development tool in the way that other entertainment industries are, or other types of industries are, in terms of not just being episodic? We have a great debate in the United States about big stadiums that are built with taxpayer funds, and then they sort of become one-offs and don't have longevity in terms of economic growth. Do you think that sports is a long-term economic development tool in Africa?
I think so, very much so. I think you just need to drive through Africa, as diverse as it is culturally and in every other way, and there'll be a young kid with a ball of some sort, more so than you will have anywhere else. It becomes very much part and parcel. And I think that when we look at development models, we should really look at the lifestyle and culture of the people, what they do, and sport very much is one. Just digressing a little bit, I was so proud recently in the Champions League final, not only to see the plethora of Africans there, but to see Burna Boy as the main musician afterwards and everybody going up to them. So we do have musicians, if we move laterally, who are global today, who have great pride in being Africans and coming back home. We need to press that button of investment that says, not only do you give opportunity to Africans in Africa, but then you have other industries that will build up from it, other growth areas that will build up from it, which will benefit everybody at the end of the day.
You know, there's been a number of demographic studies that already indicate that by 2100, 40% of the world's population will be in Africa. Do you think that institutionally Africans have enough voice commensurate with both their future potential and the present realities of what's on the ground here, specifically in sports?
No, I don't. I think there are battles within battles. The battle of playing sport, I've always said as a business person, you need to win off the field in order to win on the field. So when I get involved in any form of sports development, it's getting it right off the field. And in this case, it's taking on governments, it's taking on our global bodies, it's seeking greater equity. I mean, the fact that Africa, for example, with 50-odd countries and 30-something all affiliated to Rugby Africa have 2 votes at World Rugby, when individual developed countries have 3 apiece, means that you can't force them to equity in terms of investment, in terms of whatever. You have to find different means of getting there. So we need to fight battles off the field, not only with global bodies and with our governments, with lending agencies. We're going to the World Cup in France this year, which is the second biggest sporting event in the world after the FIFA World Cup football. Rugby is the second biggest sport in the world. And
I did not know that till we had breakfast this morning.
Absolutely,
I had other biases out of my ignorance. Yeah.
And the fact that if you take in Europe and in the West, rugby is played mainly amongst elite and better educated and the custodians of capital and business and money. I see a few smiling faces, so I know they're rugby players, ex-ones there. If I see them limping afterwards, I know they're rugby players. I know, I'll definitely know. So surely, since they control so much capital, it shouldn't be so difficult as they look to invest in Africa and bring about change.
There are some practical things investors will look for. For example, any sport rides on the back of a strong broadcasting presence, an ability for people to watch a sport on television. It's as important a partnership as government or capital or talent. That is another hurdle the continent as a whole has to overcome, isn't it? Just building out an accessible, affordable broadcasting network.
No, you're absolutely right. The dogged history, which I don't like going back to, of the fact of who are we and where we came from is a reality, because we don't have one Sky TV that covers the whole continent of Africa. Francophone Africa thinks in one way, Anglophone Africa thinks in one way, and North Africa also operates differently. So when you start looking at continental models, it becomes an issue. One of the things that we are doing in coming into power is looking first at a complete constitutional review to empower us to move forward, checking our own internal governance systems. But it's also looking and saying we should need to split Africa east-west, north-south. It's far easier to raise money when you look and say, in West Africa, there are 400 or 450 odd million people.
West Africa alone is a bigger market than the United States,
absolutely.
Potentially.
So how do we then make that work into one model? How do we then look at the East African bloc, who are the premiers of rugby, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and the likes? how do we deal up here with North Africa as a separate entity? And I think when it is we start doing that, then we can start broaching the issue of TV rights and the rest, which is so easy in Europe and America to sign off because you've got one carrier. I mean, here we've been dealing with, and we've signed partnerships with Apio, and I'm very happy about that because they are a continental rebroadcaster of news. But it is very much, we stream a lot of the things and we're taking a slightly different approach. You then come back to governments and state broadcasters and what it is they can put out are the same. But the commercial value of where they are is not quite there. But then there's the opportunity for the people with money to see that opportunity.
To think long term.
To look medium to long term.
Did we get an answer from our poll? I don't see one up yet.
I haven't voted yet, so.
You haven't voted, so we'll wait for your vote to come in. And we've run out of time. Herbert Mensah, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim.
Thank you.